Okay, last session, we ended with two amazing case studies. Case studies where middle to late middle-aged women and men who had had significant cognitive decline, who basically were recognizing that there was no hope whatsoever for them to continue their lives in any way or shape or form like they had in the previous years, by finding this comprehensive functional lifestyle medicine approach, within 3 to 6 months had been back to their lives without any dysfunction. In fact, they were better than they had been for many years before they'd even noticed they had any mental decline. Dr. Bredesen's research actually demonstrated that out of the 6 people in that initial 10-person pilot study, these 6 people that no longer could work at their job because of that significant cognitive dysfunction that they had experienced. These were jobs that they were in charge of themselves. These were their own businesses, and they could not continue even in their own business because of their severe early Alzheimer's response. Within 3 to 6 months, they're back to work. That should give all of us hope. No one is saying here that everybody with early Alzheimer's or any form of mild cognitive impairment is going to be able to get that dramatic change all at once. The point is that we should try. Because the more we try, the more we figure out what that, and uncover those areas in our health that are somehow leading to the problem, the more hope there is. See, this has nothing to do with victim blaming. This has nothing to do with saying you should stop doing this and it was this or that or the other that caused your problem. It has everything to do with helping people accomplish their goals. So let's get right into looking at this concept of genetic transformation. Because you see, everything that works, everything that either leads to disease or leads to health operates through our genes. When people say it's genetic, what do they usually mean by that? What they usually mean by that, it's genetic, it's familial, therefore there's really nothing that I can do. It has nothing to do with my choices. And that is absolutely a misunderstanding, a misapplication of genomics, of genetic science. Because nothing would work unless it operates through a genetic pathway. Everything that works, for good or for bad, does so because it's operating through a genetic pathway. And that's the beauty of genomics, and especially the beauty of what we call epigenetics, which is the factors in our life that actually turn good genes on and bad genes off. Because believe me, that all the latest science is clearly demonstrating that when you turn on certain bad genes, that leads to Alzheimer's. Guaranteed. In fact, ever since 2003, when right here in Southern California, in San Diego, researchers completely finished decoding the human genome, the human DNA sequence, that became a huge paradigm shift in science. Unfortunately, in medicine, it takes at least 25 years before what we know in scientific circles actually becomes applicable or globally applied to patient practice. So we want to do everything possible to compress those 25 years, especially when it's dealing in an area where there's no harm. See, anybody who went through medical school took the Hippocratic Oath, which is includes first do no harm. That's critical. So that's why we need to be looking for strategies that clearly do no harm. that would be good for us whether or not they had anything to do with limiting our risk for Alzheimer's or helping reverse early Alzheimer's. But the good news is that we're now starting to understand if we can find enough of these things pulled together, we can make a huge impact through the genetics, through turning good genes on and bad genes off. The science of epigenetics. Now, to understand this science, we first have to appreciate what all the factors are that actually do that. And that's known as our exposome. The exposome is essentially everything in our lives, everything around us, everything that we eat, everything that we drink, everything that we think, everything that we do, everything that we're exposed to, every attitude that we have, every word that we speak one to another impacts genetic expression. Those things are our exposome. So we all, each of us individually, have our unique exposome. And not only do we have our unique exposome, which is all the things that are affecting us, and therefore we have to be very wise in evaluating how everything around us is affecting us, because it is. And likewise, on the flip side of that, we need to be uniquely aware of how our genome is uniquely sensitive or susceptible to that exposome. Did you catch that? How are we going to know that? Well, like I said, ever since 2003, the researchers have decoded, have completely uncoded, have broken the code for the human genome, and now, right now, for $199, you can go to 23andme.com and you can order a genomic test, a personal genomic test. They will, within a few days, send you a little kit with a little saliva sampler where you muster up enough spit and you put it into this little container which has a solution in it that once you close the lid mixes with the saliva and preserves your DNA. You just go on the computer and register. It has a barcode. You just register the barcode. You make an account with 23andMe. Put your email information in. And somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks now, you'll get an email saying, congratulations, your personal genome, at least the part of which we're willing to measure, is ready. And ever since late 2015, the FDA has now given them, 23andMe, permission to provide each one of us, who take advantage of this, direct information about how genetics influence our health. There was about 3 or 4 years where the FDA says, no, we don't like this. This is kind of scary new paradigm. We don't want patients going out and committing suicide because they learned that they had an Alzheimer's gene. It's an interesting question. It's also a sad question because having the Alzheimer's gene should in no way lead you to think that there's no hope, because there always is hope. And we'll explain throughout this series how understanding our genetic risk dramatically enhances our ability to optimize our health and healing potential. You then basically download your genetic data file from 23andMe. If you go on my clinic's website, Youngberg Lifestyle Medicine Clinic, and go to the lab tab, you will see a detailed description of how exactly you go about downloading that file. There's something, 23andMe didn't make it really easy to download your data file. But once you know, it's easy. Right? Once you know what to do, it's easy. And so you can get all the information on how to download that data file. And then you go to another website called mthfrsupport.com. That stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. You don't have to remember that. All that information is on the dryoungberg.com website. Okay, so as you just remember that, you get everything else. And then you upload that data file into that new website, and they will, for $30, generate for you a 50-page detailed genetic report. It's all Greek. It's all genes. It's in categories about how well your body, your liver detoxifies, phase 1, phase 2 liver detoxification, how well your mitochondria function. Are there dysfunctions in how your little generators of energy inside every cell of your body actually make energy? That's important. You see, there's a lot of medicines out there that the majority of Americans are on right now that actually damage mitochondria. So if you have double copy mutations against your mitochondria, you're much more susceptible to those medications and other toxins. And it means it's all the more important for us to go the extra mile to protect our little power generators inside our cells. Because otherwise, the cells literally just implode and melt away, leading to muscle damage, heart damage, etc. Other categories include 2.5 pages just on Alzheimer's. I'll show you my pages in a little bit. Other categories include clotting risk. A couple years ago when I did 23andMe, I jumped up and down. I was so excited because I discovered I had the factor V Leiden mutation. I indeed was a full mutant. Don't laugh too much because you're mutants too. Okay, we're all mutants. When you do the genetic test, you see how many mutations you actually carry. And that's beneficial to you and I. Because by knowing where your mutations are, now finally we have a really valuable application, very clinically practical application to understand biochemistry. Because the mutations relate to dysfunctions in the biochemical pathways of the body. And we know where the mutation is. We know exactly where the problem is metabolically, and you can actually focus on that nutritionally. Because, see, biochemistry in the body is largely nutritional metabolism. How nutrients and vitamins and minerals are being used to lead to life and continued life and function. So we can literally nutrigenomically bypass many mutations, and we can improve the function of many areas of mutation by understanding our genetics. So I challenge each of you to sometime in the next couple weeks, go to 23andme.com, or another, that's just the one that I find to be the most accessible, and get your genetics tested. I currently now, I've been spending thousands of hours, literally, in the last few years, studying genomics, ever since I found out about this some 13 years ago, and learning how to apply this to the individual. My report now that I work with patients on is 25 pages long, and we modify that according to your individual genome. Okay, what do we do now? What do we learn by studying your genome, and how does that change our strategies that we've already been doing based on other lab tests, etc.? So the exposome is critical to understand, but we also need to understand the source of genetic change, and that is our own genome. Now, what's interesting about this slide is that the acronym for late onset of Alzheimer's disease is LOAD, L-O-A-D. And essentially, that's the big question with our exposome. Are we managing the load of stressors, of chemical and psychological and other stressors on our body, on our genome? Are we managing that effectively enough by paying attention to enough areas that help us lower that load? Because if we don't, we're not only at risk of late onset Alzheimer's disease, at much greater risk, but we're also at risk for whatever else we're predisposed to. And what might that be? Number one cause of premature death in the United States? Cardiovascular disease. Number two cause? Cancer. We become prone to whatever our weaknesses are. And that is the beauty of lifestyle medicine. When we take a lifestyle medicine comprehensive approach, we're not just helping the focus of this seminar series, brain health. We're actually dramatically improving everything at the same time. No longer are we having to decide, well, am I going to improve the brain and put the heart at risk, or am I going to improve the heart and put the brain at risk? Because, see, that's actually what's happening when we just focus on primarily or exclusively pharmaceutical approaches. And I'll show you the research on that. It is amazing as we keep going through this program. Well, the neurologist, Dr. Bredesen, at his grand rounds at Cleveland Clinic showed this slide. He says, imagine that you've just bought this old farmhouse, the farmland, and you walk into the barn and you go, oh, wow, this is going to take some work. But you say, you know what, I don't have much money. So to weatherproof this building, I'm just going to fix that one hole up there on the left-hand side of the ceiling. I'm going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to fix that one hole so well that not even a drop of water will get through. Have I invested well? Have I in any way altered the functionality of that building? Absolutely not. And that's exactly what happens when we treat chronic disease by looking for one cause. Ultimately, we need to pay attention to all 36 holes. Now, fortunately, the brain is so resilient that as you begin to follow more and more strategies that make sense to you because you learn, you become able to appreciate why this is so valuable for you. And as you start doing it, you start recognizing that, wow, I actually feel a lot better when I do this. I used to think that the only way I could feel better was to have that Diet Coke every couple hours, to pump it up, right, to get that adrenaline going and feel better. Or the only way I'd feel better is if I go have some ice cream or get a jolt of sugar, or if an athlete to get that Red Bull Monster drink to kind of crank it up. I remember some years back, a young man, very fit young man, came to see me as a patient, and I kind of looked at him and I said, "Hey, tell me, what motivated you to come in to see me?" He says, "I have been crashing and burning." I go, "What do you mean?" And I didn't recognize him. I didn't follow the BMX bike racing circuit, but he was one of the world's leading BMX bike racing specialists, professional. Made lots of money. And he told me, he says, I work out with my buddies and I crash and burn. I'm not talking about, we all crash and burn on our bikes, But I'm talking about I go and work out with him, and I'm exhausted, and I can't recover. And I'm losing my edge. This is my livelihood. I wanted to have another 5 years or more, and I'm like sucking air. My body's falling apart. He needed help. I mean, I don't see very many people in their 20s coming to see me. And so I started going through my checklist, things that lead to adrenal fatigue. Sounded to me like he had some significant adrenal fatigue. We did the 4-hour glucose tolerance test. We measured the insulin levels, and you will see why that is so critical, especially for evaluating Alzheimer's risk in a minute. And his blood sugars crashed and burned. Just dropped very low during the 3rd and the 4th hour of the test. That's a sign that there was a problem with his adrenals. They weren't working very well. They weren't being able to keep up with that stress load. And so I said to him, I said, I actually, in between visits, I Googled him, world famous BMX cyclist. And all over those pages were sports drink, hardcore caffeine, basically very high in things that are just jolting you, right? Red Bull, Monster drink, etc. And I said, this is a bad idea. You probably shouldn't be doing that. He said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That stuff messes me up. I can't drink that. In fact, he said, my sponsors make a lot of money. My sponsors actually give me cans of these sports drinks that are filled with water. I will not drink that stuff. Smart guy. He was paying attention to his body because he was starting to break down. A lot of people out there don't make that connection. They're blowing their brains literally on these type of drinks, these type of sports drinks. Very, very bad. So we want to pay attention to all 36 holes. In fact, Dr. Bredesen has on his UCLA-based study that's available online, you can read it, 25 different categories. This is not meant for you to read. It's meant to show you that it's going through every single possible lab test that is relevant, every single aspect of dietary management, sleep management, exercise management, all kinds of things. And we will be going over all those factors in this series. The bottom line, as Scientific American article in 2003 pointed out, after that revolution in epigenetics and genomics, is that we need to start focusing on hitting the genetic off switch. And guess what this was all about? New drug development. All pharmaceutical companies now, they're on the cutting edge. They're basically looking at new medicines that actually turn off the bad genes and turn on the good ones. Here's the problem, though. One gene turned off or turned on does not health make. One gene that is bad turned off does not disease overcome. That's the problem with focused and targeted genetic research using a pharmaceutical just to do one thing, because lifestyle medicine gives you changes in thousands and thousands of genes at the same time. And we'll be showing you how that works. It's the exposome that we need to pay attention to. I mentioned Dr. Rudy Tanzi to you. You can watch him on YouTube, and I encourage you to actually just type in Dr. Rudy Tanzi, Harvard, Alzheimer's. In fact, you can follow his work on the YouTube channel called Alzheimer's Cure Fund. Cure Alzheimer's Fund, rather. You know, what is shocking to me, if you notice in the lower right-hand side of this screenshot from YouTube, it shows you how many people worldwide have actually watched this amazing lecture that Dr. Tanzi had given. A major professor, the most notable professor in the area of Alzheimer's research in the world. You see that number? 212 people have watched that. And I probably account for about 20 of those myself. Brilliant, brilliant work. And we'll be showing you the genes that he and his lab at Harvard discovered, the apoprotein E4 gene, which it dramatically increases our risk for Alzheimer's if we're not paying attention, if we're not aware of it. The amyloid precursor protein genes, which are the very genes that determine whether or not your body makes beta amyloid in large amounts or small amounts. He discovered that gene. And on and on and on. And how many people are paying attention to it? I just noticed that just today. I was going like, what? I can't believe this is such amazing information. In his talk, as I was listening to him as I was driving to work one day, my wife doesn't like it when I have data overcharges. Last month we had $60 of extra data overcharges. It's your fault, Rudy. Dr. Tansey, because I've been watching him as I drive to and from work, or anytime I have to drive anywhere, I'm always trying to learn something new from the experts. Don't go with conventional wisdom. Go with the experts. Don't wait for some committee somewhere to decide what's good for you. Go to the people who are actually doing the research at the best institutions all over the world, Cleveland Clinic, Harvard, etc. Those are the people that I trust, okay? And that's what helps compress the years of time it takes to actually be able to apply this research into clinical practice. Well, one of the things that Dr. Tansey mentioned, he says, for all intents and purposes, beta amyloid plaque, which is generally believed to be the main initial driver of Alzheimer's disease in the brain, causing these plaques and tangles. For all intents and purposes, beta amyloid is an antimicrobial peptide, otherwise known as an AMP, A-M-P. When I heard that driving to work one day, I had to hold on to the steering wheel because I would have almost run off the road. Because the only other time that I ever heard that term, antimicrobial peptide, was in all the research that I've been looking at for 10 years on vitamin D. You see, vitamin D is an extremely potent antimicrobial peptide. That's why if you have a low vitamin D level, and this is definitely one of those 25 items. In fact, it's very high on the list, and it's one of the simplest things to fix. And there is 90-minute talks I've given on this that's available on the 12 Weeks to Wellness DVD series. And we don't have 90 minutes to talk about vitamin D because I want to get through a lot of lists today. But I'm telling you, if you buy into the current logic that vitamin D is not important, you're not paying attention to any of the scientific literature on this. I was shocked about a year ago when I read in a well-respected medical journal, it was an editorial. It wasn't a study. It was an editorial saying, we have gone past, we now understand that checking vitamin D blood levels is no longer really needed. It's really not that important. And went on to eloquently elaborate on why that was. That very same month, in another prestigious medical journal, there was a study demonstrating that if you have low vitamin D levels, it more than doubles your risk of Alzheimer's. Now, who are you going to believe? Somebody that has an opinion that it no longer needs to be measured? Or a researcher that actually did the research and discovered that it has a major impact on one of the most devastating diseases? So now you know where I stand, at least in part, on the importance of checking your vitamin D and optimizing that. It's so simple. And I don't care whether insurance pays for it or not. And you shouldn't care either. Because we need to get past the notion that we can't do anything that insurance doesn't cover. Because guess what? If you're not willing to do anything that insurance won't cover, you're not going to be healthy. Bottom line. Because the majority of factors that impact your risk for chronic disease have nothing to do with what insurance will cover. Okay? Very, very important. I recently helped a lady who, from Detroit, to reverse her diabetes. She's an executive. And she told me, says, you know where her health insurance came from? The very first place in the United States where health insurance came from? It was the Detroit automotive industry. They were the ones that initiated health insurance. And it single-handedly bankrupted them. Okay, so I'm one to say, you want health insurance? Get catastrophic. Do the rest yourself. I have $10,000 deductible on my health insurance. I was hoping I didn't need surgery for my calf injury. Fortunately, I don't. But even if I had required surgery, I saved so much money by just going with high deductible catastrophic. Think about it. So, we need to make sure that we understand that beta amyloid is not necessarily what we think it is. Beta amyloid is actually an antibiotic, an antibiotic that was part of our initial creation. It's part of the innate immune system in our brain. You see, the brain doesn't have ability to make antibodies and this and that. The brain basically has an innate basic immune system. And amyloid plaque is the main part of that innate immune system. A whole new way of thinking about this. In other words, the answer will not lie in getting rid completely of beta amyloid plaque. More on that in a little bit. So Dr. Tansey, in his comments, as I'm thinking about, this is a total different paradigm shift. It reminded me, in fact, I was flying up when I'd heard that as I literally was watching this. I wasn't watching it while I was driving, but I'd heard it, and then I saved it because I couldn't watch all of it, and I was watching it, the whole program, as I was flying to Newark, New Jersey. I was spending the whole weekend at a church talking about Alzheimer's prevention, talking about heart disease and diabetes management and reversal. And as I was listening to it on my plane, that long flight cross country, I began to realize that this is a huge paradigm shift, and I immediately, I was so excited I couldn't sleep that night. And I'm thinking, and I had this epiphany. Because see, don't raise your hand, but how many of you had gout? And man, if you've had gout, that just lights you up. That's one of the worst pains ever. And what's interesting is that gout is caused by a high uric acid level. This chemical will basically precipitate in the bloodstream, in the joint spaces, and form crystals jagged crystals that then lead to horrible inflammatory pain in the big toe and the arch of the foot, sometimes other places of the body. What does it have to do with Alzheimer's? Everything. Because the inflammation is what drives Alzheimer's. Any kind of inflammation turns on that amyloid precursor protein gene that then starts cranking out more amyloid. Why? Because the body needs more amyloid, because amyloid in the brain protects the brain against inflammation, against trauma, and against infection. Do you want to get rid of beta amyloid? It's your immune system in your brain. And so I realized that the analogy with gout, because I had always been perplexed when the studies show that somebody who gets effectively treated for gout and lowers the uric acid level in their blood to optimal levels from a high level, that actually increases their risk for heart disease and heart attacks. What? You're getting effectively treated for a chronic condition, and that treatment actually increases your risk for heart disease. Here's why. Uric acid is a very potent antioxidant in the body. When uric acid shoots up in your bloodstream, the body is telling you, you're really low on other antioxidants, and we're going to make this most basic, fundamental, powerful form of antioxidant and shoot it up in your bloodstream to protect your heart and your brain from all this inflammation. So the answer isn't to kill the messenger. The answer is to deal with the original cause of the problem, which, as we know in gout, is primarily diet. A high fructose diet. By the way, high fructose corn syrup or any type of high fructose food or diet, I'm not talking about whole fruits now, because fruit has a combination of things in it, and it's whole, it's complete. But any type of processed fructose not only dramatically increases your risk for gout, but it also dramatically increases your risk for weight gain, because the brain can't use fructose. When you drink fructose, the brain goes, that didn't satisfy me at all. Why don't you have another couple? Don't drink fructose. Don't eat food that's made with fructose. It's bad for us. Not only will it increase your risk for gout if you're predisposed, but it will also dramatically increase your risk for weight gain and Alzheimer's. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So inflammation is now being clearly recognized as the main driver. Now, for those of you that participated, and I see many of you in the audience, and I'm sure many of you online right now who participated in the 12 Weeks to Wellness series. We talked a lot about inflammation then, in much more detail than we can today. But what are the 4 most inflammatory food groups based on the Harvard research? Refined grains of any kind. Check. Okay, so I'm giving you more than 25 things to consider today. Processed meats of any kind, big check. That'll turn on inflammation faster than anything. In fact, refined grains and processed meats are so problematic that the only reason I sometimes give processed grains the edge is because there's so much of it. Because even people who eat processed meats generally don't eat as much of that as they do refined grains. The third extremely inflammatory food are basically sugar, candies, pastries, cakes. We all knew that already, didn't we? Right? Those foods are extremely inflammatory. And finally, one of the craziest inflammatory foods or non-foods, however you want to call it, diet soda. Diet soda is basically Alzheimer's candy. Okay? It's extremely inflammatory, and there's actually multiple mechanisms by which these artificial sweeteners, and I said artificial sweeteners drive risk for disease. So there's a short list of things that you can immediately put into effect. If you do those things right now, powerful transformation. We're talking about thousands of genes instantly start turning the right direction. Good genes turning on, bad genes turning off. Just those 4 things right there. Some of the top genomic scientists in the world have said, we are the masters of our genome. We are the guardians of our genome. I was just reading the Genesis account, just thinking about it this past weekend. And you know, the book of beginnings, where it all started, everybody's got to have faith in something, right? Everybody's got to have faith in where all this started. There's no such thing as a scientific explanation as to where things started. It's all have to do with faith and what actually makes the most sense to us. I was reading the Genesis account. You know that first family, Adam and Eve and their children, Cain and Abel? Remember, chapter 4 of Genesis, Cain is the story of the very first murder. It's an R-rated book. Just tells it like it is, like it was. The very first murder, Cain incensed that his brother Abel had been accepted over him. That Abel's sacrifice had been accepted and his sacrifice had not, even though he knew that he was bringing a sacrifice that was not requested. He was specifically not doing what he'd been requested to do. And when he sees that his brother is accepted over him, he kills his brother. What would you do if you were a father and one of your sons killed the other son out of vengeance? Especially if it was a vengeful murder of somebody who had been doing the right thing all along. I shudder to think what I would do. But you know what? You know what God did? You know, it was actually God the Son, Jesus, who came down, the creator of the world, came down, and he personally spoke with Cain. If you believe the account in Genesis, and I do, it makes sense to me, came down and spoke to Cain. He said, Cain, where's your brother? He didn't immediately destroy him. You don't deserve to live. He came down in a still, small voice. He spoke to him. And he said, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain, in his rebellious, vengeful nature, said, well, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? See, that's the rebel in us all. And Cain, Jesus looked at Cain and basically said, Cain, sin is crouching at your door. This is a direct quote. Read it, chapter 4. And I remember reading that, I go like, what does that mean? Sin is, he just killed somebody. What do you mean sin is crouching at your door? In other words, Jesus was saying, there's hope for you, Cain. If you're willing to change your attitude, if you're willing to change your ways, if you're willing to embrace what actually has worked, your purpose for this life, there's hope for you. Even now, after killing your own brother, I would be willing to die for you if you would just accept us. He says, sin is crouching at your door, Cain. And then the very next phrase, which is the reason I'm telling you the story, the very next phrase is, you must learn to master it. Wow. That is not victim blaming. That is saying there's hope. That is saying that you can master this horrible temper that you have. That is saying that you can master this rebelliousness where I want to do what I want to do, regardless of what the evidence shows, regardless about all this information that actually can bring me salvation of body and mind. Sin is crouching at your door, and you must learn to master it. Wow, it's beautiful. So the genomic scientists of today are saying we are masters of our genome. In other words, what you and I choose to do every day is basically flipping that master switch of what happens in our genome, which then determines our risk for health or disease. Now, let me make something clear. There's some individuals, no matter what we do, because of our lack of knowledge, because of our imperfect total knowledge, we can do everything possible and we're still going to have disease and premature death. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing the best that we can with what we have, right? And being hopeful about that. So, Dr. Tanzi's remarks immediately drew my attention to 2 years previously, in 2014, when I had gone to a lecture right here in Murrieta, California, where this laboratory, this medical laboratory had brought in Dr. Paul Zietka, an MD, PhD, who's an expert in cardiovascular lipidology. He's the doctor that cardiologists refers his patients to when they can't figure out how to control cardiovascular risk factors. And so I was very interested in what he had to say. And he's the director of the Florida Lipid Institute, just published several hundred studies himself in medical review literature, journals. So he's like the man when it comes to this topic. So he came to talk to a bunch of us, and guess where the lecture was? It's just funny. It's just really funny. Sad but funny. It was at a steakhouse. Okay, and so I sit down and I realize, I look at the menu and I see what they're bringing out. You know, it's kind of a set menu. And I realize, well, I can eat the string beans here. And so, you know what I did? I made a big stink, and I went to the waiter, and I said, what's your problem? Don't you know this is a cardiovascular lecture, and you know, we need to learn how to eat well. What are you doing serving all this meat? No, I didn't do that. You could shoot me if I'd done that. And that kind of attitude would cause more damage to my health than eating a steak. I'm serious. I'm serious. If we get to that, we'll talk about it. So our attitude, what we think is really the X factor in the whole thing. So we have to have the right attitude no matter what we do. Don't think, well, if I have to do this, I guess I will, but I'm going to hate every moment. Forget about it. It won't work. Guaranteed won't work. Unless you do it joyfully, unless you do it because you now have hope, let it go, because it's not going to work. And so I'm sitting down, and so I politely excuse myself, and talking to a lot of cardiovascular specialists there, and because we're talking about advanced cardiovascular risk factors, and so I talked to the waiter. Says, "Hey, listen, is it possible that you could put together a plate for me that's 100% plant-based?" And he looked at me and says, "Absolutely, sir. I'd be happy to do that for you." It's a steakhouse. But you know what? Steakhouses that are run well focus on what? Customer service. Do you know that about 5 minutes later, they brought out this spread for me that got everybody turned towards what I was getting? So they're thinking, who is this guy that he's getting all this special attention, right? So do that yourself, especially as you learn about how diet impacts brain health. So actually, this is a picture of myself and Dr. Paul Zitka at that very meeting at that steakhouse. And essentially, he said this: 60% of patients having a heart attack had previously, for years and years, have completely normal lipid levels. Cholesterol, triglyceride, LDL, HDL. Not just normal, but right where it ideally should be. 60%. Don't walk out of a consult with your doctor after having a physical and a lipid profile and a CBC, a metabolic profile, and a thyroid stimulating hormone and a full evaluation and think that you're perfectly healthy. As important and as necessary as that physical and basic blood test is, it in no way excludes the presence of disease in your body. 60% of the time. In other words, you're better off just flipping a coin deciding whether you're sick or not. That was his words. I wouldn't actually say that myself. So what was interesting is that a lipid panel has no ability to identify stroke risk. Now, why stroke risk is important in this case? Because strokes are a major trauma to what organ system? The brain. And so any trauma, any form of head trauma, whether it's a blunt injury, an accident, TIA, a little mini stroke, a regular stroke, a hypoglycemic event where your blood sugar crashes, those are all traumas to your brain. And the lipid profile, I used to believe up until this meeting that cholesterol, it seemed reasonable to me that something increases your risk for a heart attack, it should be somewhat equally a risk factor for stroke, which is basically a brain attack. It's just part of your circulatory system. So that kind of shocked me. There's really no evidence that lipid profile is helpful. And so that's why his whole point for that lecture is we got to go beyond what we've been doing all these years, because just this typical lipid profile, by the way, these are his own slides that he sent me himself and allowed me to use. And he's basically saying here is that if you have a cholesterol that's under 160, most people walk around going like, I'm pretty healthy. I'm healthier than you are because your cholesterol is 180 or 200 or 220. I'm healthier than you are. Oh, but wait a minute. There's up to a 60% chance that you actually could have a heart attack in the next year, and you with a cholesterol 220 may never have one. Right? Be careful how we compare ourselves one to another, because it really doesn't work that way. The only value of knowing this information is when you compare it against yourself, pre and post. That's the only real value, right? We're not a statistic. We're an individual, genetically unique, biologically unique person that needs to be treated very uniquely according to our special risk factors. So take a look at this, and this is a little hard to see, but in this slide here, if you look at the very first test under the advanced risk factor markers is a LP-PLA2. The PLA2 test, otherwise known as the plaque test, PLAC for short. The plaque test, it's a trademark name, is literally evaluating an enzyme, phospholipase A2, that is leaking out of plaque-infested cells and tissues in your artery wall. And so this is a direct measure in your blood of the likelihood or presence of plaque inside your artery wall. Said another way, and what Dr. Paul Zitka made a big point about, is that this is a direct measure of intra-arterial inflammation. This is inflammation inside your artery wall that is a major determining factor for that plaque fissuring, rupturing, spewing out some of that material, that plaque material, that oxidized cholesterol and dead immune cells and all the things that make up plaque. And once that gets into your bloodstream, what happens? Instantly a clot starts to form. And if you haven't been eating a high plant-based diet full of these special phytochemicals, plant-based chemicals that actually can break up clots, within a very short amount of time, that clot can form a thrombus and plug your artery wall and everything downstream of that artery. This is going up, but it's still considered downstream to your brain. That can lead to a brain attack. If it's in your heart, it's a heart attack. Anywhere in your body can cause damage, poor blood flow. So that's, by the way, why it's so critical to every day choose from what we call first-class foods, what we'll be talking more about later. First-class foods are the very foods that provide us the first-class health. These are foods that are whole and plant-based, because it's the whole plant-based foods that actually have the nutrients and the special phytochemicals in them that actually help generate good health at the genetic level. Okay? That's the value of a plant-based diet. It gives you the greatest potential for healing. The actual building blocks, the Lego blocks, if you will, of building a self-healing system. So the very next test, by the way, if your plaque test is above 2, if it's above 200, you're at high risk of a heart attack or stroke, because it's literally measure that enzyme that leaks out of plaque. Okay, the next test is the HSCRP, or the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, otherwise known as the cardiac CRP, which is a nonspecific general test looking at system-wide inflammation everywhere the blood flows. Cardiac CRP. By the way, both of these tests have been kind of deemed unnecessary recently by Medicare. They recognize their value, they're just not interested in paying for it. Okay? So, who's in charge of your health? Is Medicare? No, you are, right? We are. We are in charge of our own health, and so if this is something that we can't justify because you don't have the right ICD-10 codes, the disease-based codes to justify that, then just pay for it yourself. I do. Okay? And you might need it more than I do, except that I do have that factor V Leiden mutation that increases my risk of clotting. That's one reason I'm paying attention. Okay, so if your cardiac CRP is above 2, that's actually considered a independent risk factor for heart disease, and for heart attack, rather. In fact, it's twice as predictive as a high cholesterol is. It's twice as predictive for developing a heart attack compared to high cholesterol. Very, very important. Now, there's other tests here too, including vitamin D and HDL and small dense LDL and lipoprotein A. We're not going to talk about them right now. We're going to essentially focus on the fact that if you have both of those tests, both of those tests, plaque test above 200 and the cardiac CRP test above 2, present at the same time, research shows that your risk of a stroke, a devastating risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, just increased not 100%, not 200%, not 500%, not 800%, about 1,100%. In public health, we frequently make a big deal about a 20% increase of risk if you do this, or a 50% increased risk of disease if you do this. We're talking about 1,100% greater risk if both of those are elevated. And I have seen multiple patients, in fact, at least once a week, I see patients who have a perfect lipid profile, perfect cholesterol, etc., but their CRP is well above 2 and their plaque test is well above 200. That becomes knowledge that's useful, right? That can help motivate us to focus on the things that are most necessary for our lives. Now, as we're looking at the factors associated with promoting Alzheimer's, it's important to understand that the beta amyloid plaque starts to build up. And by what age does almost everybody already have some level of beta amyloid plaque? 40. So by the time we're 40 years of age, we can get a PET scan and we can literally image how much beta amyloid plaque we have. And that's an early warning sign that the brain is trying to protect itself from something. And so beta amyloid, as it starts to spread and it starts to build up and it starts to form clumps, as it starts to form these sheets of plaque that interfere with the way cells work, then how much time do we have? All right. Okay, so we will come back to this very point in session 3.